High upon the savage flanks of K, too deep within the unforgiving heart of the Karakoram range, Fredrik Ericsson was in pursuit of a record that would redefine the limits of human endurance. But instead of glory, he found only the abyss. It was a haunting echo of the past, mirroring the tragedy of his partner, Michele Fait, just 1 year prior. We are going to investigate why Fredrik, after the trauma of burying his friend in the ice, felt compelled to return to the death zone, and how the very equipment designed to give him freedom, the skis strapped to his back, ultimately conspired to drag him into a fatal 3,000-foot plummet. This is not merely a story of climbing, it is a chronicle of unrelenting ambition and the terrible toll it exacts. Picture a man obsessed with verticality, a visionary, dreaming of the clouds yet born into a landscape where the horizon stretches out as a relentlessly flat, straight line. Fredrik Ericsson spent his youth in Umeå in the far north of Sweden. It is a land of biting cold and abundant snow, yet it lacks the one thing his soul craved: mountains. For a skier with a fire in his belly, the local topography was nothing short of a cruel geographic joke. The hills there are painfully gentle, the ski runs frustratingly short, and any hope of true progression is strangled by the landscape itself. Fredrik realized early on that he was suffocating in this flatness. His raw talent was desperate for a stage vast enough to contain it. By the year 2000, Fredrik is 25 years old and he decides to gamble everything. He severs his ties with the Swedish lowlands and relocates to the epicenter of mountaineering, Chamonix, France. The change in scenery is absolute. Gone are the calm lakes and silent forests. He is now hemmed in by the jagged granite spires of the Alps. The mighty Mont Blanc becomes more than just his backyard. It becomes his tormentor and his greatest teacher. Ericsson transforms the entire massif into his personal laboratory for pain and progress. Conventional skiing no longer holds his interest. He pushes past the boundaries of sport and enters the terrifying realm of ski extreme. Imagine standing atop a face angled at 50 or even 55 degrees. This is not a slope, it is a wall of ice. You cannot simply stand there. You must violently drive the steel edges of your skis into the frozen surface just to defy gravity. In this environment, the margin for error is non-existent. A single misstep means you cannot self-arrest and gravity will take you. Fredrik begins to hunt down routes with legendary reputations such as the Gervasudi Couloir and the infamous Y Couloir. These are not open trails. They are claustrophobic chutes of ice, sandwiched between unforgiving rock walls, requiring a skier to dance on the knife edge of disaster. Yet Fredrik navigates them with a fluid grace, displaying a level of control that borders on the supernatural. It is here amidst the towering shadows of Mont Blanc that his radical philosophy solidifies. For the vast majority of alpinists, reaching the summit is the victory, and the descent is merely a dangerous, exhausting commute back to safety. Fredrik completely inverts this traditional mindset. For him, the grueling climb is simply the entry fee he must pay. The true purpose of his life only ignites the second he stands on the razor's edge of the peak and locks his boots into his bindings. The descent is not a retreat, it is the main event. Try to conceive of standing at an altitude usually reserved for commercial jetliners looking down at the clouds. The atmosphere is so thin that a single step demands a series of desperate gasps, and your brain begins to fog over as hypoxia sets in. In this death zone, most climbers retreat behind a mask, cranking open an oxygen tank to keep their bodies functioning. When Fredrik looks at those oxygen tanks, he sees a lie. To him, relying on bottled air is a betrayal of the sport, a way of cheating the fundamental laws of nature and physics. He argues that using supplemental oxygen artificially lowers the mountain by thousands of meters, reducing a ferocious 8,000-meter giant into a manageable 6,000-meter peak. Ericsson chooses to face the mountain on its own terms, accepting the suffocating brutality of the altitude, breathing only the thin air the planet offers. This rigid code of ethics extends to every piece of gear on his back. Look at the commercial expeditions snaking up the Himalayas. Behind almost every Western climber is an army of Sherpas hauling tents, food, and supplies. Fredrik shatters this norm. He demands absolute self-reliance, refusing to let high-altitude porters carry his personal burdens. Even as his lungs burn and scream for air, his shoulders support the crushing weight of his own dreams. And make no mistake, his pack is significantly heavier than anyone else's at base camp. Above 7,000 meters obsession leads climbers to saw the handles off their toothbrushes just to shave a few grams of weight. Fredrik does the exact opposite. He willingly straps an extra 5 to 7 kilograms of dead weight to his pack. These are his skis, the tools of his trade. On the exposed ridges, the wind catches these skis like a ship's sail, threatening to rip him off the mountainside and cast him into the void, yet he trudges upward. In ski mountaineering, the smart move is to use short featherweight skis. Those are easy to transport and maneuver in narrow, icy couloirs, but Fredrik refuses to compromise his art. He hauls massive, wide, full-sized freeride skis all the way into the death zone. Why subject oneself to such torture? It is all for that fleeting moment when the skis finally kiss the snow on the descent. Many high-altitude ski descents are ugly affairs, climbers simply side-slipping down, scraping for their lives. To Fredrik, that style was an abomination. He was chasing aesthetics. His soul craved the perfect turn, a continuous fluid line carved down the face of the giant. He needed those heavy, long skis to provide the stability required to actually ski the mountain rather than just survive it. He is prepared to pay for 5 minutes of sublime perfect skiing with hours of hellish, back-breaking labor on the ascent. But theories are easy. The mountain inevitably demands a practical test. In the year 2003, Fredrik decides his apprenticeship is over. He moves his ambitions from the Alps to the roof of the world, traveling to Tajikistan to confront the formidable Ismail Somoni Peak. It is a monolith of granite and ice rising nearly 7,500 meters a place, where the Pamir winds freeze arrogance in an instant. Here in the thin air, he subjects his uncompromising philosophy to its first true trial. Standing on the summit, Ericsson gazes down into the abyss. Before him lies a vertical drop of 3 kilometers. This is not sport. It is a marathon of survival, where thighs burn with lactic fire and lungs struggle to extract oxygen from a vacuum. He drops in from the very pinnacle and does not stop his fluid motion until he reaches an altitude of 4,500 meters. To understand the magnitude, visualize this. He skis a vertical distance equivalent to 7 Empire State Buildings stacked one atop the other. This triumph proves that his heavy gear and purist ethics are valid not just in Europe, but on the world's highest stages. But triumph is a dangerous drug. It only sharpens the hunger. The very next year, in 2004, Fredrik escalates the danger. He targets the death zone proper, setting his sights on Shishapangma in Tibet, standing at 8,012 meters. This is an entirely different beast. Above 8,000 meters, the human body enters a state of slow decay, and every physical action requires a colossal summons of will. Fredrik locks into his bindings in a place where most humans can barely remain upright. He launches his descent, and in that act he carves his name into the history books, becoming the first Swede to ski from an 8,000-meter peak. The critics fall silent. This was no stroke of luck. By 2005, Ericsson is bound for Pakistan, entering the wild, lawless beauty of the Karakoram range. His objective is Gasherbrum, 2 towering 8,035 meters above the sea. For this expedition, he teams up with a powerhouse Norwegian climber, Jørgen Aamodt. The mountain throws everything at them, near vertical slopes and bulletproof ice. They climb without bottled oxygen, haul their own gear, and execute a flawless, beautiful descent. For 3 consecutive years, Fredrik has thrown himself against the highest walls on Earth and emerged victorious every time. The mountaineering community begins to view him in a new light. He is no longer dismissed as the eccentric Swede with the heavy backpack. He has cemented his legacy as an elite high-altitude ski mountaineer, a man capable of executing challenges that others view as elaborate suicide attempts. However, success breeds a unique and perilous dissatisfaction. For Fredrik Ericsson, merely repeating the feats of yesterday is insufficient. He scans the global map, looking past the summits, to find a challenge that no human being has ever dared to accept. Ericsson unveils a project that teeters on the fine line between genius and madness, skiing the Big Three. His audacious goal is to ski down the 3 highest points on the planet, Everest K2 and Kangchenjunga. Pause to consider the sheer insanity of this undertaking. Everest is the celebrity of mountains, a crowded hub of commercial tourism, where ski tracks, while rare, have been seen before. But K2 and Kangchenjunga exist in a different reality. When he begins this project, these titans remain virgin territory for skiers. Throughout the entire history of mountaineering, not a single human soul has ever managed to complete a ski descent from their summits all the way to base camp. History is littered with ambitious souls who tried this and found only retreat or a cold grave. But Fredrik is ignoring the past. He intends to venture into a realm where the history of ski mountaineering is a completely blank canvas. He is placing a massive wager on himself to achieve an absolute unprecedented first descent. This level of audacity sends a shockwave through the industry. Major global brands immediately recognize that this Swede is the ultimate brand ambassador, a figurehead who genuinely believes in shattering the limits of human capability. The sponsorship deals flow in. Dynastar delivers their highest performance skis, Osprey equips him with tactical packs, and Tierra provides the technical apparel designed to keep a human alive in the cosmic freeze of high altitude. Fredrik secures the kind of resources that most adventurers only fantasize about, but that funding brings a crushing weight of expectation. He is no longer just answering to his own ambition, he is now beholden to investors who demand a return on their capital. The proposed timeline is basically a death sentence for any semblance of a personal life or recovery time. Ericsson locks himself into a brutal 3-year window from 2008 to 2010, promising to conquer a new giant peak every single season. He is stepping onto a conveyor belt of lethal risk. While most elite climbers require years to physically and mentally recover from a single 8,000-meter peak, Fredrik plans to chain them together, tackling these monsters back-to-back without a break. This strategy leaves absolutely no margin for error. He is robbing himself of the necessary time for deep acclimatization and removing the luxury of waiting for a perfect weather window. He is pushing all his chips to the center of the table, transforming his existence into a frantic race for the Big Three, the ultimate prize. The legendary status of being the first human to carve a ski line in a domain ruled only by ancient gods and screaming winds. Mount Kangchenjunga welcomes the team with a silence so heavy it feels deafening. The year is 2008, and the opening round of this battle looks nothing like the polished, romanticized scenes you see in high-budget adventure documentaries. You won't find queues of tourists at the fixed ropes, a bustling city of tents at base camp, or any well-defined trails to follow. Ericsson and his climbing partner are operating in a complete vacuum. They are the solitary souls on this titanic mountain. It is the closest thing on Earth to being an astronaut stranded on Mars that is the depth of isolation they are experiencing. A simple problem here escalates instantly to a fatal crisis because the rescue cavalry is not coming. The mountain wastes no time in showing them its vicious personality. Instead of the firm, compact snow that makes for efficient climbing and dreamy skiing, the face is drowning in tons of fresh, unstable powder. These aren't just drifts, they are loaded avalanche traps waiting to snap shut and bury them with one wrong step. Every vertical foot turns into a torture session. Fredrik is forced to plow a trench through the white ocean sinking to his waist and often his chest. His upward progress grinds down to a painfully slow crawl. His metabolic engine is running on fumes, incinerating calories far faster than he can possibly replenish them. This is the moment Ericsson stares directly into the face of his own physical limitations. The thin air vaporizes his strength with terrifying speed. Fredrik would later articulate the feeling with haunting precision. Up here, executing just 4 or 5 ski turns destroys your body as much as skiing a full 1,000 vertical meters back in the Alps. Let that math sink in for a moment. A movement that costs nothing at sea level demands every ounce of his life force in the death zone. A simple sequence of turns sends his heart hammering against his ribs, forcing him to collapse and gasp for air for minutes. Once they breach the altitude between 7,000 and 7,500 meters, the mountain delivers a non-negotiable ultimatum. The snow depth becomes impossible, and the avalanche danger spikes off the charts. To continue upward in these conditions is simply a complicated way of committing suicide. Fredrik is torn between his roaring ambition, screaming, "Go," and his survival instinct whispering, "Stop." Ericsson proves his professionalism by making the only logical call. He retreats. The summit remains untouched, but the overarching project survives to fight another day. He locks his boots into his bindings right there at his high point and points the tips downhill. It isn't the glorious headline he wanted, but it is an honest, hard-fought descent. He escapes the death zone with his life banking invaluable experience in extreme isolation and conserves his energy for the next even deadlier boss battle. They call K2 the Savage Mountain, and in the summer of 2009, it prepares to validate that nickname from the first moment. Fredrik arrives deep in the Karakoram range, mentally shelving the disappointment of Kangchenjunga. Here at the base of this colossal pyramid, he connects with a man who speaks his language without needing to say a word. Enter Michele Fait, a gifted Italian skier who joins him as a partner. It is a meeting of two identical souls. They are both consumed by the same singular obsession to ski lines, where most alpinists are just praying to stay alive. The duo selects the Sesson route for their attack. Visualize a massive spine of rock and ice rocketing into the sky from the south-southeast. This line is significantly steeper and more direct than the traditional Abruzzi spur. For a skier, it looks like the ultimate dream run, but for a climber, it is a perilous nightmare. That season, the mountain decides to rewrite the rulebook. The slopes reflect the sun like a polished ballroom floor. Instead of soft, edgeable snow, they are confronted with vast fields of bulletproof blue ice. For a skier, this is the worst-case scenario. On a surface, this hard steel edges struggle to find purchase, and a single careless shift in weight threatens to turn into an uncontrollable slide into the abyss. Despite the mountain wearing a suit of icy armor, the expedition builds momentum. Their acclimatization schedule runs like clockwork. Ericsson and Fait shuttle back and forth to the high camps, tricking their bodies into accepting the lack of oxygen. They climb high sleep in the thin air and ski back down, testing the surface and their nerves on every lap. With every successful turn, their confidence swells. Their physiology is adapting perfectly. The weather gods offer clear windows, and a quiet sense of victory permeates the base camp. The partners feel they are in the peak physical condition of their lives. They share laughs over tea and map out the specifics of their historic run. It feels as though the mountain has accepted their challenge and granted them passage to the top. A wave of optimism floods the team. They can clearly see the goal they have chased for years, and they truly believe luck is riding with them. The thin air of the karakoram is thick with the intoxicating scent of imminent success, drowning out the quiet intuition, warning them about the mirror-like ice. But gravity on K2 does not negotiate. It simply waits for a single millisecond of hesitation or error. On the 23rd of June 2009, this brutal truth comes crashing down on the expedition with permanent consequences. Fredrik and Michele drop in from Camp 2, sitting at an altitude of 6,400 meters. This isn't even the summit push. It is just a routine rotation, a standard descent to a lower camp for rest. The atmosphere is relaxed, their movements practiced to the point of being automatic, but the mountain they thought was welcoming suddenly rips off its mask. That same ice which had sparkled so beautifully in the sun transforms into a lethal trap. Michele Fait initiates a turn on the steep face. One subtle mistake, perhaps just a weak edge set, and his steel edge fails to bite. Fredrik becomes the unwilling witness to a horror show unfolding meters away. He watches his friend and partner, a master of his craft, instantly transform into a helpless object surrendered to the laws of physics. Michele doesn't just tumble, he rockets into the void. The slope acts like a giant friction-free ice slide with no safety barrier. Fait falls for approximately 1,000 meters. Let the magnitude of that number settle in. That is a full kilometer of free fall, down a surface as hard as concrete. Fredrik is left alone, above, suspended in the dead silence that follows the roar of the slide. He is solitary on the face, facing the most agonizing ordeal of his life. To confirm the fate of his friend, he has to ski down to him. Those 20 minutes of descent stretch into an eternity of dread for Ericsson. He is forced to navigate the exact same sheet of ice that just claimed Michele. Every turn is a war against rising panic. He cannot slip, he cannot shake, or he will follow the exact same trajectory into oblivion. He forces himself to lock into a trance of pure technique, shutting off all emotion and working like a machine, carving meter by meter toward the stillness below. When Fredrik finally glides to a stop at the bottom of the face, the last flicker of hope is extinguished. He finds Michele lying in the snow. It is brutally obvious that there is no need for medical gear or a pulse check. The silence on the high mountain is heavy, screaming louder than any words ever could. Fredrik kneels in the snow beside his friend, checking for a pulse he knows isn't there. He confirms the grim reality. The life had drained out of Michele Fait long before his partner could even get close to him. In a single heartbeat, an elite expedition fueled by massive ambition and careful planning shatters against the brick wall of death. Now they face the nightmare of logistics, trying to figure out a burial in air so thin that helicopter rotors can't even bite into it to generate lift. Fredrik stands over the lifeless body of his partner and processes the cruel mathematics of the death zone. There is no rescue coming. There is no cavalry. Evacuating a body from a slope this steep and coated in bulletproof ice is not just difficult, it is physically impossible. Any attempt to drag the body down would essentially be a suicide mission, risking the lives of everyone left standing. The mountain has claimed her prize, and K2 is notorious for refusing to give back her trophies once she has taken them. Ericsson is forced to do something that would shatter the soul of an ordinary person. He grips his ice axe, and with his own freezing hands he begins to dig. He prepares a final resting place for his friend right there in the biting snow. This farewell takes place in absolute crushing solitude, accompanied only by the whistle of the wind. There are no witnesses, no priests, no ceremony. He leaves Michele exactly where the mountain took him, letting him become one with the eternal ice of the Karakoram forever. You would think this is where the story ends. After witnessing a tragedy like that, most normal people would burn their skis, block every climber's number, and never look at a snow-capped peak again. They would walk away and never look back. But the mind of an extreme athlete is wired completely differently from the rest of us. Instead of retreating into safety, Fredrik takes this trauma and twists it. He finds fuel in the tragedy, using it as the burning motivation to push forward. He doesn't view continuing the project as a gamble. He sees it as a sacred obligation. A crystal clear formula locks into his mind: if he stops now, Michele's death will have been for nothing. The only way to truly honor his friend's memory is to finish the job they started together. The grief doesn't break him down. Instead, it forges him into a weapon of cold steel resolve. Ericsson throws himself back into training with the obsession of a fanatic. He develops a singular laser-like focus that pushes every other thought out of his brain. K2 is no longer just another mountain or a checkmark on the Big Three list. It is transformed into a living entity, a personal enemy that he must defeat to find any semblance of closure or peace. Every single ski run, every grueling session in the gym, every moment spent on the snow is dedicated to one thing: the return. This transformation is visible to everyone around him. Even the camera lenses pick up the hardened look in his eyes. In the documentary Skiing Everest from 2009, the audience sees a shift. They are no longer watching a cheerful skier chasing an adrenaline rush. They see a man carrying the weight of the world, looking right through the interviewer, staring 1,000 miles away at the summit of his dreams. The media broadcasts his statements, and the world gets the message loud and clear: he isn't just going back for a climb. He is returning to finish a game that death rudely interrupted halfway through the first half. Fast forward to the summer of 2010. The Karakoram Mountains feel like a fortress under siege, but the gates are welded shut. The mountain has decided that it isn't letting anyone inside this season. Fredrik is back at the base of K2, and this time his safety line is in the hands of an American Trey Cook. His new partner is young, built like a tank, and shares the Swedes' insane skiing ambitions. On paper, they look like the perfect squad for a rematch. But the mountain dictates the rules, and the rules this season are catastrophic. The weather destroys every schedule they have. The sky is a ceiling of heavy lead, and storm force winds rip the snow off the ridges, turning the routes into impassable labyrinths of death. Usually in July, base camp is a party buzzing like a kicked beehive. You have hundreds of tense generators humming and stoves roaring. But this year, it is the total opposite. It is quiet, too quiet. One by one, the other expeditions start tapping out. They admit defeat. Large commercial groups strike their camps. Sherpas load up the duffel bags, and the long caravans begin the sad march back down the Baltoro Glacier. Base camp empties out at an alarming speed, turning into a wind-battered ghost town almost overnight. Logic and survival instinct say the season is done, and it is time to get out of there before winter locks the door for good. But Fredrik refuses to follow the herd. He refuses to submit to the panic. He looks at those empty tent platforms and digs his heels in. For him, this isn't just another vacation that can be rescheduled for next year. This is a personal war, and he is not about to retreat without throwing a punch. He shifts into waiting mode, staring into the endless gray gloom, hunting for even the tiniest drop in pressure that might signal a break. The days bleed into one another, dragging on with excruciating slowness. Snow buries the tents, and with every passing hour, the hope of a summit push melts away a little more. It is in this vacuum of total isolation that a key player steps onto the stage. Gerlinde Kaltenbrunner, an Austrian mountaineering legend who is just as stubborn as Fredrik. She is still there, and she refuses to pack up and leave. She is chasing her own history, trying to be the first woman to bag all 14 8,000ers without bottled oxygen. Their missions are different. She is climbing on foot while he is hauling heavy skis, but the drive is identical. What binds them together is that grit, that shared refusal to quit. From the scraps of the failed expeditions, a super team forms. Fredrik, Trey, and Gerlinde decide to join forces, becoming an elite squad born of desperation. They are the last gladiators left in the arena, ready to pounce on the one tiny weather window the fickle mountain might offer. It is 1:30 in the morning. They are deep in the death zone. It is a time when every rational cell in your body screams to stay warm in your sleeping bag, but the group starts moving. It is August 6th, and Camp 4, perched precariously at 8,000 meters, becomes the launch pad for their final desperate push. The climbers crawl out of their tents and step straight into a black, roaring void. Here on the high shoulder of K2, the atmosphere tries to kill anything that breathes. The thermometer reads minus 15 degrees, but that number is a lie. At this altitude, with the wind howling at 40 kilometers per hour, the cold isn't just a temperature. It is a physical assault sucking the heat right out of your core, through every layer of gear you own. You can't see a thing. Visibility is down to maybe 100 meters. The beam of a headlamp just smashes into a solid wall of blowing snow, illuminating nothing but the boots of the climber ahead and the white abyss. Stepping out into a storm like this feels like absolute insanity, but what drives the team forward is the forecast. A radio report promised a break in the weather. They are betting everything that by morning the wind will die down and the sky will clear. They are trusting a few numbers on a piece of paper, more than the chaotic storm they can see with their own eyes. They convince themselves the storm is just a temporary trial, a toll they have to pay to get to the top. In this slow-moving chain of climbers gaining altitude, Fredrik's silhouette is unmistakable. While everyone else has stripped their gear to the bare minimum to save weight, a massive structure towers over Fredrik's back. He is carrying his skis. They are strapped to his pack, extending high above his head like antennas. In the hurricane-force wind, those two wide planks act like giant sails. The gusts catch them slamming into him, trying to spin him around and knock him off the mountain. Every single step for Ericsson is a double effort. He isn't just fighting the lethal lack of oxygen and the pull of gravity, he is fighting the leverage of the wind, trying to throw him off the face of the earth. The physical strain is unimaginable. Here, where lifting a finger costs a fortune in calories, Fredrik is voluntarily carrying the cross of his own philosophy. He could have left the skis at camp. He could have climbed light. But if he did that, the entire project would lose its meaning. For him, standing on the summit without his skis is a failure. So he pushes through the dark haze, balancing against the wind's blows, dragging this heavy burden to the point where he plans to make the most important descent of his life. The group continues the grind upward, praying that the sunrise will bring the calm they were promised, opening the door to the summit that is currently buried in a thick fog of snow. Welcome to the Bottleneck. It is a name that sends shivers down the spine of anyone who follows mountaineering, but only a handful of humans have ever seen it with their own eyes. On the morning of August 6th, sometime between 6:30 and 7 o'clock, the group reaches the base of this terrifying couloir. Hanging directly above their heads is a colossal ice serac, the size of an apartment building, waiting to collapse. This is the choke point, the narrowest, most dangerous section of the entire route. It is a natural architectural trap where a climber is pinned between a sheer vertical wall and a bottomless abyss. It is right here under the shadow of this ice monster that the expedition begins to unravel. The cold strikes the first blow. Trey Cook, Fredrik's partner, realizes something is wrong. He is losing feeling in his fingers. Up here at this altitude, that isn't just discomfort. It is a one-way ticket to amputation or falling to your death because you can't grip your axe. Trey makes what is possibly the hardest decision of his entire life. He halts dead in his tracks. A silent war rages behind his eyes, the blinding allure of the peak clashing violently with the primal urge to stay alive. Fortunately, survival instinct takes the wheel. Cook pivots away from glory and initiates the long journey back down. In a heartbeat, the team is whittled down to a skeleton crew. Only 2 souls remain committed to the push, the Swedish skier hauling a massive, awkward burden on his spine, and the legendary Iron Lady of the high-altitude world, Gerlinde Kaltenbrunner. Their entire strategy shifts gears right here. Fredrik and Gerlinde make the call to disconnect, severing the physical link between them. To anyone watching from sea level, this looks like pure madness, launching an assault on the planet's deadliest peak without the fundamental insurance of a partner tether. However, up in the stratosphere, standard logic gets flipped on its head. In this environment, a rope stops being a lifeline and transforms into a deadly anchor. It creates drag-it snags on jagged ice, and worst of all, it creates a suicide pact. If one climber slips, they almost invariably pull their partner down into the void with them. At 8,000 meters, moving fast is the only real protection you have. The less time you spend exposed to the kill zone, the higher your odds of survival. So they unclasp and become solitary operators. They proceed on parallel lines or tread carefully in existing boot prints, keeping a calculated buffer of space between them. From this point forward, every mistake is theirs alone to own. Fredrik kicks the front points of his crampons into the bulletproof snow, fighting to keep his equilibrium under the shifting top-heavy load of his skis. A few meters away, Gerlinde is locked in, meticulously placing each foot. The safety tether is gone, replaced by something intangible, a silent mutual pact to reach the top. They are stepping directly into the lion's mouth, banking everything on raw talent and the mercy of the mountain, having left their rope down below with Cook. The clock reads 8:10 in the morning. This is the precise instant where the timeline of K2 freezes in place. They have breached a critical sector situated just above Gerlinde and veering right of the primary couloir. The mountain's face morphs here, turning into a disorganized nightmare of loose scree and deceptive pockets of powder. Fredrik Ericsson commits to this specific line, hunting for purchase that feels more secure than the glass-smooth ice of the Bottleneck. He is wading through deep, sugar-like snow that acts as a trap, concealing the jagged, uneven boulders lying just under the surface. The death zone wraps around him, an environment where simply inhaling is an exhausting feat and a lapse in focus means the end. In this second, he is entirely disconnected from the earth. No safety line, no belay partner, just a man on a ledge. His continued existence hangs on the tiny amount of friction between his boot soles and the slope. Sensing how sketchy his stance has become, Fredrik makes the call to install a safety anchor. He reaches for his gear and pulls out a rock python. The strategy is sound and practice drive the metal spike into a fissure, snap a carabiner onto it, and manufacture a moment of security on this vertical wasteland. It is a textbook maneuver, something he has executed countless times back in the Alps. But the Karakoram range plays by different rules. The rock here is rotten, pulverized by eons of wind and freeze-thaw cycles, often disintegrating like stale bread when you strike it. Suddenly, the physics holding him to the wall simply give out. The exact catalyst remains a mystery. Perhaps his crampon skated off a hidden lens of ice, or maybe the rock face itself sheared off as he swung the hammer. His center of gravity shifts past the point of no return. On an incline of this severity without a rope to catch you, nature offers no do-overs. Gravity claims him in a heartbeat. Gerlinde Kaltenbrunner, working her way up from a few meters below, is the only human being alive to witness the nightmare unfold. She is dialed into her own rhythm, double-checking her footing when a blur of motion in her periphery shatters her concentration. In a landscape that should be still, something is moving fast. She snaps her head up to a gut-wrenching reality. Fredrik is no longer ascending. He is coming down. He rockets past her, gathering velocity with sickening acceleration. There is no shout for help, no flailing attempt to arrest the fall, just the eerie, muffled silence of the high atmosphere. 1 second, he was an elite athlete at the peak of his powers. The next, he is a helpless projectile vanishing into the white void. Instinct screams at you to clamp down on your ice axe, but on a face this precipitous, the laws of motion are already sealing your fate. Even in midair, Fredrik attempts the maneuver ingrained in every mountaineer's muscle memory, the self-arrest. It is pure reflex action. The move requires you to roll onto your belly, slam the pick of the axe into the ice, and leverage your body weight to brake before the fall becomes terminal. On a standard run, he might have pulled it off. But here he is sabotaged by the very gear he hauled up the mountain. Rigged to Ericsson's pack are his signature powder skis. In this terrifying instant, they stop being tools for glory and mutate into a mechanism of death. The boards tower over his head, shifting his center of mass and creating a giant lever arm. As he picks up speed, the wind resistance catches the flat surface of the skis, turning them into a rigid sail. The aerodynamic drag sends him into an uncontrollable spin, physically preventing him from rotating his body into the self-arrest position. He fights to roll over and dig his pick in, but the ski tips smash against the slope or catch the airstream, violently flipping him back onto his spine. He is no longer in control of his own body, just a rag doll, tumbling down a sheer chute of ice. The magnitude of this drop is almost impossible to grasp. From the comfort of a living room, Ericsson falls for 1,000 meters. Visualize 3 Eiffel Towers stacked end to end. That is the distance he travels. It is a massive vertical descent where the human form reaches terminal velocity, intermittently smashing against granite spurs and concrete hard ice. In seconds, he undoes the progress of hours of agonizing climbing, flashing past every landmark they had fought so hard to reach. Time dilates into a horrific eternity as gravity tears him away from the mountain's face as effortlessly as a gust of wind blows a grain of sand. The trajectory finally terminates near Camp 3, sitting somewhere between 7,000 and 7,200 meters. He lands in a remote snowfield far removed from the established climbing path. The crash is followed by a silence so heavy it feels physical. One does not require a medical degree to understand the grim reality of the situation. After tumbling a full kilometer down jagged terrain at the velocity of a freight train, the biological damage is catastrophic. The human frame simply cannot withstand that level of trauma. There is zero probability of survival. The end is instantaneous, likely claiming him before his body even ground to a halt, mercifully sparing him from any prolonged agony. Fredrik Ericsson perished without carving a single arc on the peak he dedicated his life to, betrayed by the equipment that was supposed to make him a legend. The stillness hanging over the mountain now screams louder than any human voice could. High above Gerlinde Kaltenbrunner, balances on the lip of the precipice, peering down into the swirling white void. She desperately rakes the slope with her eyes, hunting for movement, praying for a miracle that he managed to stop the slide. But K2 offers no hope, only debris. Perched on the ice below, she spots a solitary ski. That composite plank of metal and plastic, which just minutes ago was a vessel for world records, now sits abandoned, a mute tombstone marking the tragedy. For Gerlinde, this is the psychological snap. The summit, tantalizingly close, and only hours away, evaporates from her mind instantly. She turns away from the prize and initiates the grueling robotic climb down, motivated no longer by glory, but by the somber obligation to tell the story. Simultaneously, thousands of meters below, near Camp 3, the next act of this tragedy begins to play out. Yuri Ermachek, a veteran Russian mountaineer, sweeps his gaze across the face. His vision, sharpened by decades in the death zone, locks onto an anomaly disrupting the endless white canvas. It is too distinct to be a rock, too solid to be a cloud shadow. Ermachek squints against the glare. It is a body still attached to a backpack lying motionless, off the beaten path roughly 400 meters vertical from their tents. Fredrik had slammed to a halt where the physics of the crash deposited him buried in a pocket of deep powder. 400 meters might sound like a quick hour's hike at sea level, but K2 guards its victims with jealous intensity. Standing between the rescue team and the crash site is a lethal labyrinth of Syrax. Picture skyscrapers of glacial ice teetering precariously over the slope, primed to collapse at a whisper of vibration or a single degree of warming. The sun is climbing high, baking the face, and the entire ice shelf is beginning to groan and shift. Any route to retrieve the fallen climber cuts straight through this active demolition zone. The team at Camp 3 is paralyzed by a brutal moral standoff. They can see him clearly, they have pinpointed his location, but they understand with chilling clarity that stepping into that terrain is nothing short of suicide. The stability of that entire sector hangs by a thread, with the risk of secondary avalanches skyrocketing into the red zone. The mountain has effectively raised a fortress wall, a jagged barrier that simply cannot be breached without incurring a catastrophic loss of life. At this point, the rescue operation slams headfirst into the brutal reality of physics. Going back up is a suicide mission. Down at the lower camp, the climbers stand frozen, craning their necks to spot that tiny, insignificant speck amidst the endless white void, and the crushing realization hits them. They are completely insignificant when pitted against the colossal architecture of the savage mountain, a beast that recognizes no human authority. Mother Nature has drawn a definitive line in the ice, a boundary that separates the living from the dead, and to cross it is to join those who have perished. While the survivors at Camp 3 gaze helplessly up at those terrifying, impassable towers of frozen water, the tragic news leaps across the globe, traveling thousands of kilometers in the blink of an eye. A digital signal beams up from the desolate Karakoram range, bounces off a satellite, and descends into Sweden, shattering the domestic peace of the Ericsson household. The phone rings in the silence, carrying a frequency that signals the end of a world for the family inside. Fredrik's father, Jan Olof, picks up the receiver to face the nightmare scenario that haunts the sleep of every parent with a child in extreme sports. The voice on the other end delivers the cold, hard facts without sugarcoating a slip, a devastating fall, a visual confirmation of the body, and a precarious snowpack that spells death for any rescue team attempting a recovery. Suddenly, the fate of every climber on that mountain rests not on the chaotic weather patterns or the quality of their ropes, but on a single decision made by a grieving man standing in the safety and warmth of his living room. The entire operation pauses, waiting for his command. Jan Olof listens to the grim report, the gears turning, as he processes the impossible weight of the situation. He is torn between two primal forces, the desperate, heart-wrenching need to bring his boy home for a proper burial in native soil, to have a grave to visit with flowers, and the grim reality of the mountain. On the other side of the scale lie the lives of Yuri Ermachek Gerlinde and the other brave souls who are gearing up, willing to gamble their own existence to recover their fallen friend. Fredrik's father digs deep and makes a decision that requires a level of courage few will ever have to summon. He utters a single powerful command: stop. He issues a strict prohibition against risking the living for the sake of the dead. Jan Olof knows with absolute certainty that his son would never have wanted his legacy to be stained by the death of his friends trying to retrieve his shell. That solitary word brings the entire rescue machinery to a grinding halt. Over the crackling satellite connection, the father relays his final wish, a directive to leave Fredrik exactly where he found his ultimate peace. He frames the decision with a heartbreakingly poetic sentiment. Let him remain there forever, looking out over his beloved mountains. And so K2 transforms into an eternal high-altitude mausoleum for the Swedish skier. His body remains untouched, surrendered to the Karakoram snows to perform the task they have performed for millennia, to shroud, to cover, and to preserve in ice. Fredrik ceases to be just a visitor and becomes a permanent fixture of the landscape he tried to tame, merging seamlessly with the glaciers and the granite in a silence that is absolute and unending. Gerlinde Kaltenbrunner receives this verdict with a heart heavy with grief, yet she accepts the wisdom behind it. For her and the shattered remnants of the team, this is a direct order to stand down, relieving them of the burden of a suicidal recovery mission. The objective is gone, the route is erased, and all that remains is a gaping void where her climbing partner stood just hours ago. She officially calls off the expedition. The dreams of the first ski descent, the obligations to sponsors, the hunger for triumph, all of it evaporates into meaninglessness in a split second. With mechanical movements, Gerlinde packs away her gear, turning her back on the summit that on this day proved it possesses a will far stronger than human ambition. The mountain has won and it demands respect. The group initiates the somber, long descent back to the valley floor, leaving Fredrik Ericsson at his final resting altitude to keep an eternal watch over the peaks he loved more than life itself. But while rocks remain unchanged, trauma carves deep scars into the human soul. A year later, in 2011, Gerlinde returns to the foot of K2. She is driven by a need for closure, determined to summit the last of the 14 8,000ers to complete her life's work. However, she finds she physically cannot force herself to step onto the Kezan route, the very path where Fredrik lost his life. The haunting memory of her friend and the visual of that specific couloir trigger a pain too intense to overcome. Consequently, she makes a radical tactical change. She decides to approach the beast from a completely different angle, far away from the scene of the tragedy. Gerlinde selects the North Ridge on the Chinese side, a wild, desolate, and incredibly remote route, devoid of commercial expeditions and, most importantly, free from the ghosts of her past. She successfully claws her way to the summit, finishing her grand odyssey of the Himalayas, yet the specific challenge of skiing down K2 remains an open question gaping like an unhealed wound. For 8 long years, the savage mountain violently rejects anyone arrogant enough to bring a pair of skis to its death zones. The K2 ski descent project evolves into a mythical beast regarded as the last great problem of high-altitude skiing. The climbing community begins to whisper that perhaps this specific face was simply never designed by nature to be skied by man. That formidable barrier finally collapses in 2018. A Polish phenomenon by the name of Andrzej Bargiel arrives on the scene, ready to rewrite the history books. He pulls off the impossible, executing the first complete descent from the peak to base camp, masterfully linking several different routes into one continuous line. However, the context and style of his success stand in stark contrast to the raw attempt Ericsson made years prior. Bargiel represents the hero of a new digital era. His arsenal includes drones that scout snow stability in real time and deliver emergency supplies, backed by a massive support crew and cutting-edge technology. It is a magnificent triumph of logistics, engineering, and modern planning. Yet when viewed against the backdrop of this technological breakthrough, the lone tragic figure of Fredrik Ericsson ascends to a special status. He remains the ultimate benchmark for absolute alpine purism. He went for the prize using nothing but the air in his lungs, the strength in his legs, and a pair of skis with zero air support and absolutely no margin for error. His legacy is not measured by a summit flag, but by the uncompromising purity of his style. Fredrik demonstrated to the world that the beauty of the line chosen and an honest, stripped-back approach to the mountain could hold more weight and meaning than the successful descent itself. Even today, when veteran climbers gaze up at the terrifying Bottleneck, they don't just see Bargiel's successful track. They see the invisible ghost line of the Swede who refused to compromise his high standards, even when staring into the face of death.